DACT in the Mirage 2000 is almost like a two-story event. When you talk about DACT, you talk about one circle fights and two circle fights. The Mirage 2000 is a two-story combat aircraft, because if you do combat ACT, Mirage versus Mirage, you fight the aeroplane in a different way. If you fight it DACT versus F-16, F-18, Rafale, or whatever, you have to adapt the aircraft to fight what the threat is. The Mirage 2000, and it took me a long while to understand it, the pilots on the squadron when I joined, who were very experienced, they were exceptionally good at combat. And the French Air Force are very, very good combat pilots. You know, they will go off and do whatever mission they do, and if there's 5 minutes at the end of the sortie, they will do a quick 1v1 split, pure combat. Whereas the RAF, when I flew in the RAF, we never did that. You know, we would do intercept sorties, and then we would do some combat on a different sortie, but we would never mix the two. Very seldomly. It was, you know, they had to be briefed specifically. The Mirage 2000 is quite an interesting aircraft to do combat in, because with a delta wing, you have a fantastic turn rate, but you also have massive induced drag in terms of you can pull 9G at 450 knots, but you know, you'll end up at 200 knots. So when you actually come to a merge and whatever you're fighting, there's actually no point in coming past at 600 knots, because all you're going to do is just bleed it to 200 knots. So unless you're going to go into a vertical maneuver and convert that into height, then there is no point. So you have to really understand the dynamics of a delta wing, and how once you've lost that energy, and if you get below the drag curve on it and you get below whatever the speed was, and I can't remember what it was, but you can't just, if you come into the merge and you do 450 knots and then you do this massive back turn to try and get a shot away, if you don't get your shot, you can't just leave it in full reheat and accelerate. It won't accelerate because there's so much drag on the wing. So you have to either put the nose down, or you have to unload it and really push to unload it, to unload the wing, to accelerate back to 450 knots again. And some of the pilots in the squadron, they were incredibly gifted at combat. And as I got more proficient, you could do combat 1v1 against a Mirage, and it was eye-watering to see how close you could get. And that old phrase of, you know, a knife fight in a telephone box, never truer than it was in the Mirage 2000. And it was just insane, to use a modern word, to what you could do in the Mirage 2000, because you could end up in this very, very close fight, Mirage versus Mirage, and because it was so maneuverable, that you would end up in a position where you could put your gun sight on a Mirage 2000 like that, and you'd just be about to take a gunshot on some guy, and he would just pull, and next thing you know, he'd be nose on to you, and or be sort of nose on and pointing down like this. So whereas in a Tornado, somebody once said to me that when you do air combat in an F3, it's eventually you end up at base height at 5,000 feet, and it's like watching two dinosaurs plodding around this big circle. So you're opposite sides of the circle, and once you become experienced as a fighter pilot, you can predict 30 seconds ahead. So you can be two sides of the circle looking across at your Tornado F3, and you go, right, he's 180 out from me now, and I know in 30 seconds he's going to be here, so I want to be here. And it's like watching this chess in slow motion. Whereas when you do combat or DACT in a Mirage 2000, you don't have that luxury, because the 3D game of chess that you're playing is just changing so rapidly and so quickly. So you have to be very aware of it, and you have to be aware of what your adversary is. So the F-16, for example, isn't quite as good, particularly on the earlier models at low speed. So you might capitalize on that, or you might use the fact that the Mirage 2000 has got this fantastic instantaneous turn capability, and you might try and get a quick shot and then bug out and then fight another day. But it's a very interesting aircraft to fly. And of course, since Mirage 2000, nobody else has had a Delta. The Rafale's a sort of Delta, but it's not really a Delta. And it doesn't, you know, the Mirage 2000's got little tiny canards at the front, but it hasn't got movable canards.
Of course,
It definitely was a game changer in terms of going from a Mirage 3 to Lightning type F3. All of a sudden, people looked at the Mirage 2000 and went, wow, that's a pretty manoeuvrable aeroplane.